John, Steve, I have 3 words for you, or actually I guess 5 words, but do you know what they are?
Super something.
You're close.
Stunt Race FX.
Oh my god. Stunt Race FX is back, baby! Yes, Steve, you get me! So last night we got news of a data miner on Twitter who discovered that when going through the NES app, he discovered that a list of 22 separate SNES titles within the app itself, suggesting these may be coming to the service sooner rather than later. So I thought it'd be fun for us to get together and discuss our thoughts on this data mine, whether the games are actually coming, what it means, what we think of the selection of games, how we think this will impact the Nintendo Switch Online service, everything involving it. In addition, there was some other news that came out about this as well, and that's the fact that they found 4 emulator types within that same app. So that, of course, covers the NES and Super NES now, but there's 2 mystery ones, and everyone's wondering, what could they be? N64 and GameCube, Game Boy, or Game Boy Advance? Who knows? There's a lot for us to digest here. So first up, what do you guys think about the data mine itself? Do you think these games are coming soon, or do you think maybe Nintendo's just testing things? What do you think the data mine actually means?
I gotta imagine it means it's coming soon, but
Right.
One thing I wonder about is, are we gonna get every single one of these games day one? Because the NES launched with 20, I believe. But yeah, these are all like stellar Super Nintendo games. We're still kind of missing some of those big NES games like Kirby's Adventure. So if we get all of these day one, then I'm gonna be very happy, but I somewhat doubt it though.
I'm with John. I don't think we're getting all of these day one. I think there is a portion of them, and I do think that this means they have to be coming soon. The person that mined this data said that they just added this in the new update, and I can't think of a reason why they would if they weren't planning on adding this functionality in the very near term.
Let's make a bet. Let's say that this is going to be in the next Direct.
Yeah,
Ooh,
it will be. I think it will
Hands
be.
down.
Yeah, I honestly believe this might be even an indicator that we're closer than we think to the next Direct.
That's a good point.
Maybe.
And the timing, too, of this whole data mine is actually pretty astounding because it came on the 2-year anniversary of the January Switch event in which they had first announced that Super Nintendo games would be coming to the Switch via the online service. So, although the official announcement didn't come on the anniversary, I think this is a pretty good sign, though, that, that they are coming, finally. A little bit late, but
Better late than never.
it's true.
Right. There's some stuff that have to change though with if Super Nintendo games are to come, because the app at the moment is called NES Nintendo Entertainment System Online. So are they going to have a separate app, or are they just going to kind of merge these together? I think having these all data mined within the NES app probably means they're going to be within the same app, but they're going to have to kind of rebrand it. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, what do you guys think on that? Are they going to have 2 different ones, or are they just going to kind of merge it together?
That's a really good point. It almost makes you wonder. I think they will be within the same app, given this data mine, and I think that makes sense too. That way it's easier to hop between game to game when you're hopping, or when you're playing with friends. That way you can hop from an NES game to an SNES game, for instance, without having to switch apps and reconnect. So I think that all makes sense. But the fact that it wasn't branded originally as something more encompassing is making me wonder if Nintendo maybe start rushing these plans into action, given the reaction to the Nintendo Service Online app or service in general, which has been pretty tepid, to put it kindly.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I played quite a few NES games when the service launched, but I've not touched it since then.
Nor I.
Apart from when they add games and have to do an update on them, but apart from that, I just don't use this app very often.
Because NES games are old news. We played them in so many forms before, whether it was on Animal Crossing, on the GameCube, for free, by the way, or as part of the purchase, on the GBA when they were re-released, on the numerous virtual consoles, on the NES Classic. We are kind of sick of these games. Super Nintendo games, on the other hand, while they have been re-released in a few forms as well, aren't nearly as overdone, and there's still a lot of them that haven't been re-released at all, really, like Star Race FX that I already touched on, so...
Yeah. It is a really, really strong list. If this is completely legit, I mean, if we get all these games, it'll be amazing. And like you said, Andre, they have not released a lot of these games. We don't get retreads of Super NES games nearly as often as we do the original 8-bit stuff.
And yeah, I've often said that I just don't care about playing a lot of these NES games multiplayer, mostly because most of the lineup can't be played multiplayer. But if they added Contra or Super C to the NES service, I would play that online, but they've not done that. But interestingly, this Super Nintendo lineup has Contra 3, which is a game I'd love to play online. So, any Contra game I'd play online, but for some reason they just haven't put it on the NES lineup. And that's despite Super C being on the NES Classic.
That's a good point. I mean, there's a lot of games here that I think will be fun to play online, period. Whereas that wasn't the case for the NES. I mean, you have Kirby Superstar, which is a fantastic co-op experience. Kirby's Dream Course, which is amazingly competitive. Star Race FX again, by the way, has a two-player mode. Super Mario Kart, come on, that's going to be fantastic. And then Super Mario All-Stars even has the classic Mario, the Super Mario Brothers arcade style multiplayer game in there. So yeah, this could be just a more appealing service across the board, I think. And the sooner they get out there, the better. But to answer one of your questions from earlier, John, as to whether we'll get all the games at once or doled out over time. Even though the NES app launched with 20, with this being seemingly part of the same app and with me thinking they will be as well, I think they're going to dole these out slowly. Maybe they'll give us a little bit more at launch to celebrate it, maybe 5 games. Other than that, I fully expect them to go back to the 3 or 2, games a week model, as the NES has been so far.
I mean, there are still some big games that aren't on here, though. Like, Earthbound's a big one. That's a big Nintendo game that's not on there. Final Fantasy III's not on there. Secret of Mana is not on there. I'd love to play that online. So yeah, there are things they can keep adding, and I guess they could do more third-party games too, because they clearly are doing third-party games. Like Breath of Fire 2's on there. We got Super Ghouls and Ghosts on there. So yeah, they're quite clearly merging first-party and third-party together. So I think if they did just launch with all of this, they probably have enough material to just keep adding more and more. But yeah, realistically, they're probably going to do 3x3 every month or so.
Yeesh.
There are some notable omissions here. I mean, much of the SNES Classic lineup is here, but not all of it, as you mentioned, Earthbound, for instance. Of course, Donkey Kong Country as well. None of the Donkey Kong games are here, which is unfortunate, because DKC 2 is also missing from the SNES Classic, and that, of course, is a classic game. So I don't know what's up with Donkey Kong games right now. Especially with Tropical Freeze, people would want to go back and revisit these games now, I feel like.
Right.
But, I mean, I think this is just the start. This isn't every game that's going to be hitting the service. Presumably, Nintendo Switch Online is going to be a service for years to come, if not indefinitely, and they'll want to keep adding games to it. Although, then again, one would hope they would then move on to other platforms as well, such as the other 2 hinted here, which, who knows what those could be.
Yeah, the problem with adding more platforms is it kind of worries me that they're gonna spread their games out thinner. Mm-hmm. So every month they'll do an NES game or a Super Nintendo game, and then just that's it for the entire month. Because as of now we have 3 NES games. So what if they just spread that out across different platforms? In some cases that's better. In other cases it's we're still spreading our platforms thin, if that's how they do it.
Yeah, I think best case scenario, if we do end up getting a total of 4 supported platforms on it, honestly, if we got 3 games a month across 4 platforms apiece, a dozen games a month wouldn't be bad. That said, I don't foresee them doing that at all.
One thing that's quite funny is Mario All-Stars is on here, yet Super Mario Bros. 2 is still not part of the NES Online service. So I guess that's a 2-in-1 right there.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I thought you were going to take a different angle with that, is the fact that Super Mario World and All-Stars are listed here individually, which suggests, because there was a later release of Mario All-Stars that also had Mario World in it, so that tells me that this is probably going to be the first version of Mario All-Stars, which means we're never going to get that custom Luigi sprite they added for Mario World, only in All-Stars, so...
No love for Luigi.
I know.
His year is over.
It ended. Yeah, otherwise, I think this is actually a pretty great selection to start off with. And there are some games on here that I actually am not terribly familiar with, if at all. Super Soccer is a game I hadn't heard of before. Poppin' Twinbee apparently is a game that only came out in Europe, I believe, John, you were telling me?
That's right. Yeah, it came out in Europe and Japan, but never America. That's not unprecedented. When they did Virtual Console, Mario RPG never came out in Europe, but that came to our Virtual Console. So this could be a cool way of sort of localizing games that were never really localized in specific regions.
What's kind of funny is before this discussion, we got on the topic of Earthbound and how Steve had never played it, and the service isn't going to help you much, Steve, because Earthbound's nowhere to be found here, unfortunately. But
yeah, what gives?
Right? Seriously, what's the deal with that? However, what on this list does speak to you right now? What are you looking forward to playing, either for the first time or just to revisit?
I'm really looking forward to Super Punch-Out. I mean, I played tons of it as a kid, and I'm anytime I can play Super Punch-Out, I'll play it. I bought, what was it? I think it was Fight Night for the GameCube, just because it had Super Punch-Out in it. Legend of the Mystical Ninja. I love Goemon games, and so I'm totally thrilled to go back to this one too. And then there's just the evergreen stuff. Link to the Past, Super Mario Kart, Star Fox, and this one guy I know keeps bugging me to try Stunt Race FX, so I guess I'm going to play that at some point.
Hey, I'm just going to throw it out there. The last time that guy suggested the game to you, it was Tropical Freeze, and so far I think you're loving it, so...
You know.
Yeah, there's a great selection, Steve, and it's cool that we have Super FX chip games on here too. And there's actually one big Super FX chip game, being Star Fox 2, which was formerly exclusive to the Super Nintendo Classic. So it's cool that we're getting games that never actually natively released on the Super Nintendo, like, through this service.
Yeah, that is really cool, actually. It is nice to see that Star Fox 2 is getting even more love. I think that game it's actually quite good. And the fact that Nintendo officially discontinued the SNES Classic now means that there was no other way to officially play it until seemingly with this service, so I'm glad more people can experience that.
One thing I'm thinking about that isn't actually in this data mine is special versions, because the NES Online service, for some games it does like a special version where it basically just mixes things up a bit, but thus far they have been kind of underwhelming. So, like, to use an example, Metroid Special just spawns you outside Ridley's door with the ice beam and says, "Hey, remember Ridley from Super Smash Bros? Well, here he is, you can fight him." And that's the entirety of that special. Dr. Mario Special just puts you at the end of, I think it's like level 20, and shows you this alien cutscene. So, yeah, a lot of those special games aren't all that special. But there's more they can do with them, and I'm kind of thinking, like, which games are going to get special versions, and what can they do with them?
Mario All-Stars, you could have it so they could just have fully filled out save files for you, so you can actually choose exactly what level you want to start it.
I was also thinking, like, Contra Special, but I guess, you know, you have the Konami code anyway, but I guess, like, you could have just like a pre-made version with, like, tons of lives and the best weapons to start off with. But that's not really that special for Contra, though.
That's true. You could do Super Metroid, similarly to how Metroid is set up. Just start a game where you have everything at the very beginning, and let people run through as a super overpowered Samus, getting to explore in whatever order they want.
That'd be pretty cool, actually. I like that idea. I mean, you can even do the same for A Link to the Past, right? Like,
yeah.
That might completely break the game, but it'd be kind of fun. If it had all
A Link to the Past, but you play as a bunny the entire time.
Oh, man. That would be kind of incredible. Yeah, it'd be cool if they come up with more ways to, like, kind of reinvent these games a little bit. I don't think they will, but it would be neat if they took the special idea and went a little bit farther with it than they have on the NES. So, do you guys think they'll release a special Super Nintendo controller for this, like they did for the NES?
I can't think of a single other thing they can do for the special offers this year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they will.
Yeah, I anticipate we'll get one. I'm hoping it does away with the Joy-Con rails. I think that was a little silly for them to do for the NES controllers. If we do get a Super Nintendo Classic controller for the Switch, I want it to just be like a Pro controller. Straight up Bluetooth, give me a USB-C port on the top and make it rechargeable.
That's a good point, because the NES controllers make sense when it's a Famicom controller, because obviously with the Famicom, they connect it to the console.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily transfer, like, to Western audiences, and it definitely doesn't make sense for Super Nintendo. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you there.
Right.
It just looks funky to have these controllers poking out of your Switch.
It does, and I actually, I haven't done the test by holding my Super Nintendo controllers up to the side of my Switch, but I'm actually not sure that,
It's
they
not
would
tall
have,
enough.
it might not be tall enough to house two Super NES controllers on its sides.
Yeah, while sitting in the dock, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
I think the SNES controllers might actually hit whatever surface you have the dock on.
Right, and they're curvy too. So, like, how does that work?
Good point.
Yeah.
And they also have these shoulder buttons already on top, so there's all kinds of problems potentially with the SNES controller. Regardless, I think it will happen in some form. And I think that would be, and it'd be way better or way more versatile than the NES controller with more buttons, so it should work in more games as well, which would be nice.
Oh, absolutely.
So, moving on real quick, the other part of this news, as I mentioned at the start, is that there were 4 emulators found in total as part of this app. As I mentioned, 2 of them are, of course, the NES and SNES ones now, but at least 2 left. which could potentially also hint at other classic systems on the way, like an N64 Classic, for instance, because apparently the emulator used for the NES matches that used in the NES Classic. So what do you guys think might be on the way? Do you think those emulators are actually hinting at more classic systems, or at the least more consoles hitting the service? And what could they be? What systems would you hope for to be able to play on the Nintendo Switch Online service?
I think I've seen a lot of comments saying they hope it's N64 and GameCube. I think it's probably not GameCube. I think they're probably going to remaster more GameCube games. So my bet's probably N64 and Game Boy.
Ooh, that's interesting. I'll admit I'm fully in the N64 and GameCube camp. I do agree, John, that I think they're going to remaster GameCube games and we probably would not get a ton of them. But there was that rumor back before the Switch even launched that Nintendo was going to emulate GameCube games on it. And it seemed to pick up quite a bit of steam. I'm not sure where it came from or what the origin of that rumor was, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if somewhere, NERD was working on a GameCube emulator for use either in a GameCube Mini or on the Switch. And I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo wants to take those emulators that they're writing, because they're fantastic, and port them to the Switch. So I'm not sure. In the short term, I do believe N64 is almost certainly a lock, because they can sell me Mario 64 as many times as they want, and I'll buy it, unless it's on the DS. And Game Boy would do well, but I'm just I do guess, maybe there is something to that, because there isn't really a truly portable system in the Switch online apps library yet, and portability is half of the selling point of the console, so you may be onto something there.
Imagine having a good portable Mario 64 as well. That's something special.
Oh,
yeah, that'd be amazing. Man, can you imagine living in such a world?
We did get Odyssey, though, so we can't complain too much.
Oh,
that's true.
And speaking of 64, what would be cool is if we got the modified Japanese version of the game, or the second release of it, which had Rumble Pack support. Exactly. So they could do that for Wave Race as well.
And that's a great point too, actually, because we can natively go from NES to Famicom apps just by downloading the other version. This means they would probably have access to some N64 DD games, like F-Zero X. We probably won't get a localized version, but we can just hop onto the Japanese store and just play their version.
With the whole track editor and everything.
Right.
Oh, great.
Man. If we could finally get 64 DD games in the West, I'd be thrilled. I still want to play Doshin the Giant.
Yeah, same here. I never played it myself either. As for me, what systems I'm expecting, N64 and Game Boy kind of make sense as the next classic systems, maybe not in that exact order. So I'm kind of leaning toward that too, even though they do seem to be a bit of an odd pairing versus N64 and GameCube, or Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. But yeah, I am leaning toward those two being the most likely. So I still think we'd get a classic version of either of those first as well, because Nintendo loves their money and they want to squeeze as much money as they can out of them before putting them up for free on a service like this. And with SNES possibly carrying us through the year, hopefully that means we'll see either an N64 or Game Boy Classic this year, with the games following up maybe next year on the Nintendo Switch itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. They are technically, it's not free, but they're technically part of the service. And the service is $20, and it just feels a bit too generous to give away GameCube games. Whereas I feel like the value of NES and SNES and N64, I feel like they've kind of diminished over the years. They still go for lots online. But in the mindset of a lot of consumers, I think they don't really value them. They sort of see them as ROMs in a way, like things they can just play. And yeah, I feel like they're different to GameCube at this point, whereas they can still remaster a GameCube game and sell it at full price.
That's a good point. I mean, we did get Wind Waker HD on the Wii U, and that was not a discount release. So,
right.
Yeah, you have a very valid point. I could see getting N64 and Game Boy. I mean, I would well, I guess you could do Game Boy Color, and that wouldn't be much of a distinction these days. But,
yeah, I feel like Game Boy and Game Boy Color would go hand in hand with each other, either as a classic or on the service.
Yeah. And having Donkey Kong 94 playing on the Switch, that's a dream. That's one of the best games
ever. Oh my god. Not only that, by the way, I want Super Game Boy functionality. I want those classic borders. I want the updated color palettes.
You kind of have to have them because, I mean, the Switch is a widescreen console, and nobody connects it to a 4x3 television either. So, you would need to have something to fill up that negative space on the screen. I can't imagine Nintendo would want to advertise playing on a tiny block in the middle of your widescreen TV or on your widescreen Switch. So they would have to do something, I think, add borders or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. And, I was thinking about this. What are the odds that they just say, it's Game Boy, not Game Boy or Game Boy Color, but also Game Boy Advance? They already have a working emulator for Game Boy Advance that they made for the DS. So how hard would it be or for the 3DS, my apologies. How hard would it be for them to get that working on the Switch, for instance? And I think that those games, considering how visually appealing they are, could be a major selling point, and they would look good alongside SNES games.
You also bring up the point that none of us have mentioned, which is it could just not be N64 at all. It could just be Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, these other two emulators. But yeah, I would be okay with that. Both platforms have lots of great software to play. Game Boy Advance is only around for a few years, but it still has a brilliant library.
Absolutely.
And I also think you can probably do quite interesting things with online with Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. Like, what if online worked as a link cable? And you could, I guess you can do this in the Game Boy versions of Pokemon locally. But what if you can, trade online? Or what if you could just basically, play any Game Boy Advance game, over online? It would sort of change a lot of things about how multiplayer usually works with those systems. Probably to a greater extent than any other of these consoles.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if they would allow that, because it would work different from the other apps, or from the other games in the app, in that you would be running two instances of the same game versus just one on one console. So, yeah, I hope they do that, because that'd be really neat. I want to play Tetris multiplayer on the Game Boy.
It seems like a bit much, but if they did, that would just be really cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be amazing. And if we're talking about Game Boy Advance emulated on the Switch, there is the impossible will never happen thing. But what if they could get Crystal Chronicles working and use the Game Boy emulator on other people's Switches to connect to someone's Switch port of the game? It'll never happen.
Not where I thought you were going,
but I
with that,
want it to happen.
That'd be amazing. That would be something.
I thought you were going to say the M word, the Mother 3 word.
Yeah, I thought that too.
Oh man, no, that'll never happen.
Yeah, I'm fully in that camp now too. I think there's not a chance at all these days.
Yeah, I think at this point that's just written in Reggie's contract that it just doesn't come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, after talking about Game Boy and Game Boy Advance a bit, I'm actually a little bit more convinced that N64 might not be coming soon. Because if our predictions are correct, we kind of all think there's going to be an N64 Classic this year. And would they have that on this service if they're trying to sell that console as well?
That is a really good point, and I agree with you, John. If we do get an N64 Classic this year, I don't see us getting N64 games also on the Switch, because then you're undercutting the reason to go buy that N64 Classic. Not only that, I mean, people are going to want an N64 Classic controller for the Switch, because a lot of those games would feel wrong on anything but that weird three-pronged controller.
That needs to have the dock, by the way, the rails.
Oh yeah. You put the rails on that thing.
Have 4 of them.
And you give me a case so that I can take it to E3 like that.
Yes, I'll buy a custom dock to make that happen.
I would actually buy those. I mean, I've not bought an NES controller, and I probably won't buy a Super Nintendo controller, but I'll definitely buy an N64 controller. Yeah. It just feels wrong playing those games on anything but that.
It does.
Only if it comes with Mario Party and a blood-stained thumbstick.
That's all I want, Steve.
Oh, man. Maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe they're not Nintendo emulators. Maybe they're for other systems. Like, what if they had Genesis on here again? Or, what was the other... There was another classic console on the Wii, for instance.
TurboGrafx.
TurboGrafx, yeah.
They had Neo Geo on the virtual
there we
consoles
go.
as well.
Like, they could go that route.
My only problem there is both Neo Geo and Sega are kind of selling their own games in their own way.
That's true.
So Sega have Sega Ages, Neo Geo have Arcade Archives, and Sega also just released a retail collection of Genesis games. So, I mean, it's not impossible. They definitely could have other companies doing that, and Sega could very well have like a third pillar of how they sell their games. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure if they go that route, but it'd be very cool if they did.
Yeah, I agree with John. It would be cool. Sega is also selling a Genesis Mini at some point in the future. It's been announced, but I think it got delayed, and who knows where it's at now. And the Neo Geo Mini's been out for a while, so they're trying to kind of do the same thing Nintendo's doing. So I don't see that happening, frankly, but, and not to mention, at that point, it'd kind of be wisest for Nintendo to go back to the virtual console branding instead of calling it Nintendo Switch Online or anything like that. And I think they've made it pretty clear that they're stepping away from the virtual console brand.
That's true, yeah. I mean, it probably is more likely it will be a Nintendo or more Nintendo emulators. But I think it is possible if they wanted to have like a rotating selection of various third-party games. And those could act as advertisements in a way for their own like collections or classic consoles in the case of the Genesis, for instance. So I don't think it's impossible because, I mean, especially given the fact that, as you guys said, it seems unlikely we would see these other emulators this year if Nintendo wants to do more classic systems. But maybe they're abandoning it. Maybe they're done with classics, in which case maybe this is the future going forward for Nintendo, where this is how we get the N64 and Game Boy games, and maybe even beyond that.
That's also a really valid point, Andre, because when you think about it, they'll get $80, $100 maybe per console, depending. I imagine an N64 Mini would cost a little bit more than an SNES, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, costed a little bit more than an NES Classic. So as that price steadily increases, that it comes with R&D costs and shipping and all this stuff. For these, they just have to, the R&D is creating a piece of software. There's no physical product to ship, and they just make their money off people subscribing to the service. And it helps them sell more Switches, because suddenly with this $20 a year subscription, you get access to N64 games and Game Boy games, and you have the NES games and SNES games. It becomes a more attractive proposition, and people will pay for it more. And it may do something to move consoles, which is really what Nintendo wants to do. These classic items, as they've mentioned in the past, are just kind of like limited time promotions for them to make some quick cash over the holidays, basically. So it's clear that it's not a huge priority for them to sell these pieces of hardware. And if they could instead use the classic games to make the Switch more attractive, that may be something that they're looking at. We don't know for a fact that an N64 Mini is coming, even though most people seem to think it is.
Do we expect this to stay at $20 though? That's the question. Because at the moment we're paying $20 for to access online and basically to play NES games. And I think when you add Super Nintendo to the mix, that's still a fair price. But when you have N64 and potentially GameCube and Game Boy, is that still are we paying too little for that? Like, do you think they'll up the price, or are we staying at $20?
You're kicking a hornet's nest right now, I feel like, because there are a lot of people out there who would argue that what we're paying now is not the amount we're paying now is not at all worth what we get. I actually disagree with that. I think the price is fair for what we get. I don't think it's a particularly exciting service, but for what it does, I'm like, yeah, that's fair. Basically a few bucks a month. I'm not heartbroken over it. So, anyways, to speak to your point though. I kind of agree, though. Like, I actually fall on given the fact that I think it is fair now, I think if you add too much beyond SNES, that I could then see the value, like, it being worth more than what we're paying. And I think the better way to go about that then perhaps would be, is you maintain the current service where for the base online, NES and Super NES games, you pay the existing few bucks a month. If you want a more like premium version of the service, then you pay a little bit more for it, like a gold version of the service or something. I think that might be a good way of going about that. That way they can keep adding exciting new features or games at the least to it without compromising the ability to play online at a reasonable cost.
See, now, I don't agree with you.
Oh man.
So my problem with this is that this sounds great in a world where Xbox Game Pass doesn't exist. Xbox Game Pass is $10 a month, and you get brand new games. And granted, they're not on the caliber of Ocarina of Time or Mario 64 or really any of Nintendo's first-party offerings, but they are brand new $60 games. And that's really hard to reconcile with a service that costs $20 and gives you 30-year-old games. And granted, that's $10 a month, whatever, and you're paying $20 a year here. But what I'm saying is it changes how people view the value proposition for games that you're borrowing, not for games that you don't own.
Right.
And I do think I'm with you in that I think $20 a year is more than fair. I think we're getting kind of a deal, because really we pay triple that for PlayStation Network or for Xbox Live, and we get to keep some games, but they're like, they don't really compare in quality. But when you look at Xbox Game Pass, you get everything they do first party, and granted, that's again much more expensive when you think about it, $10 a month versus $20 a year. But I think consumers are going to have a problem choking down more than that $20 right now, because the quality of Nintendo Switch Online outside of the NES app is pretty, I don't want to call it poor, but it's definitely weird. We still don't, it doesn't offer us the most basic things that other online services offer us, and I think if Nintendo tries to crank that price too much higher, they're going to have to introduce some major quality of life improvements on the online gameplay side of things to get people to remain invested in it.
I think you're right, Steve. Like when Netflix add new movies, they don't say, "All right, you have to pay us more now." It just stays like at a flat price, and sometimes movies rotate out, but still, you're always charging the same price for Netflix. And I think that's kind of a standard for all subscription services. So yeah, you probably are right. I can see Andre's way working out too, though, because the games are different to movies. Like movies are a bit more. You go through them faster. With games, you're dedicated to them, and you're sort of playing through them with more commitment. So I can see them, if they added GameCube games in particular, I can see them saying, like, here's the GameCube bonus, you have to pay us to get these GameCube games.
Yeah.
Whether they will, though, I mean, you are right, there's a standard for subscriptions where they don't change price.
One point to consider real quick, though, is you made an interesting comparison, Steve, with Xbox Game Pass, which actually is a really good deal if you want to play those games. $10 a month? Yeah, that's great. The difference, though, I think, slightly, is that is a separate subscription from Xbox Live, which if you want to play any of those games online, you're also going to need. So right now, Nintendo has this weird, like, combo version of that, right? Where the value proposition is a little bit different, I think. Where if they added like the value of Xbox Game Pass, like that would be an amazing deal for Nintendo Switch. Like for $20 a year, that'd be ridiculous. And don't get me wrong, I would love for that to be the case, but practically, I don't think that's going to happen. Which is why I think, as John said earlier, I think Nintendo does currently value GameCube games a little bit higher, and even maybe N64 games than they do NES and SNES. Which is why I very much doubt we'll get those games at the existing price. If we do, hey, hats off to you, Nintendo. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting too. John actually made a really great comparison too, because and it ties into one of your previous points, Andre. The Netflix comparison is pretty apt here, because you were talking, correct me if I'm wrong, about like a tiered system where you pay a little bit more to get access to some of those more recent games. And John mentioned Netflix. Well, Netflix does actually offer a tiered subscription. If you want 4K video on Netflix, I think you have to pay something like $5 or $6 more a month.
That's true, yeah.
And so they could do something like that. Just say Nintendo Switch Online with NES and SNES is your standard $20 a year, and if you want GameCube and N64, those games are going to cost you an extra $10 or so per year. And that isn't an unheard of business model. So it is something they could do. I don't think consumers would necessarily bite on it, but it is up there in the realm of possibility. But the more we talk about it, the more I do become convinced that we're going to see Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games.
I also have one more issue with GameCube. GameCube games are big. NES games and Super Nintendo and N64 games are not big. So when you have GameCube games which are all over a gigabyte each, and you have like 20 of them, that's most of your Switch's memory taken up. And I wonder how it's going to work with the service.
That's true. You'd have to set up something to where you can download the GameCube games on demand, because you don't even have enough internal memory in the Switch to house 20 GameCube games along with a bunch of N64 games, and assuming you own at least one digital game. So you would run out of space really, really fast.
Yep, that's a valid point. So
So yeah, I think about it, and it just gives me this really nice sense of symmetry, having two home consoles and two portable consoles on a hybrid machine. It makes a lot of sense almost from a marketing standpoint, saying, here are the Switch games that were designed to play on the go, and here's the ones that were designed to be played on your couch, and you can do both of them in this one place.
I like that. That's a good message. Yeah, I mean, I think at the very least right now, this is kind of exciting news. I mean, it's unfortunate that it had to come out via a data mine. I mean, hopefully this gets announced officially, but it does give us like something to look forward to in terms of Nintendo Switch Online at the very least, which I think is something a lot of people are looking forward to, because the NES app does have, like, I think it's a great idea. It's just not a great selection of games these days, or at least one that's, fresh enough for us to keep playing after being exposed to them for 30 years now. So I guess to wrap it up, do you guys have any final thoughts all about, these games, other emulators, perhaps, or other games coming to the service, or anything else you'd like to see as part of this?
One thing we didn't do, and I hate to throw an exercise right at the end of the show here.
Oh, man.
Oh, no.
We didn't workshop any names for the new app.
Oh, geez.
We talked about it, but we didn't talk about what our picks were for what it would be named, and I'm going to give myself a minute, so I'm going to throw it to you, Andre.
What's the current one called? It's just NES? Like NES?
It is called, I'll tell you right here, I got my Switch in my hand.
Perfect.
Alrighty.
It is called NES Nintendo Switch Online, I believe.
So you just tack a Super onto it. Super NES Switch Online or whatever.
Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo Switch Online. I'm going to go ahead and say that they are just going to drop a console name from it.
Yeah.
It will just be named the Nintendo Switch Online app on your Nintendo Switch.
Maybe, but it tells you nothing about it.
I think they'll use the classic headline they've been using for the Nintendo Entertainment System Classic and the Super Nintendo Classic. I think they'll just call it Classic System Nintendo Online or something. That, or they'll just say like NES Super Nintendo Online, and then just keep adding different barrels onto the end of it whenever new consoles get added.
Super
that
NES
is believable.
64 Online.
Super NES 64 Cube Online.
There we go. Perfect.
Advance.
Yeah.
I'll buy it.
Yeah. So I am curious to see what form this new, presumably this renamed app takes, and hopefully, once again, it just gets announced soon. Come on, January Direct. I hope. First off, I hope that's a thing, and I hope this is the thing within that thing. So it needs to happen.
Yes, please.
All right, guys. Anything else, or are we about done here?
I want them to add Earthbound so Steve can play Earthbound.
Yes.
Yes,
you gotta
please.
play it, man.
Please. I know it was the smelly magazine ads that turned me off. I was 11 and that was not my thing. Go away. You want me to play your game? At least smell good.
That's what sold me on the game, actually. Love
Andre,
that.
you're a weird boy.
And we're ending it here. So thank you guys so much for watching. And of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for lots more on Super Nintendo games hitting the Nintendo Switch, hopefully once it's announced, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.